Today we're going to talk about the kind of foods you should eat if you're physically active. And I mean really physically active. Like if you're a player on arguably the greatest football team in the NCAA, who I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, I'm going to call it 2021 Big 12 champions. Pretty safe. Okay, good. Yeah, so what we want to know is if you're a football player on one of these high-performing teams, what kind of foods should you eat? How do they work with you to make sure you're at peak performance? And to learn about that, we're going to talk to the team's dietitian, Lauren Abbott. Thanks for coming, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first tell us a little bit about what the life of a football player is like. What are they doing right now? What are they doing during the playing season? And don't leave out all the mental things like the billion plays Coach Gundy has them memorized.
Absolutely. So they are busy 24/7. Right now during the summer they're working out, they're lifting 4 times a week, they're running. Friday mornings they run stadiums, so they're out there at 6 o'clock in the morning running. They have meetings with their coaches. They have practice in the afternoon with amongst themselves. They run a player-led practice in the afternoon. And then all the time in between, they're still going to class. Most of them are in classes too. So they're incredibly busy just preparing for the season. And then once the season starts, it's a even busier schedule. You add just as much practice, but more meetings, traveling on the weekends being gone, and more school. So they have a lot on their plates.
How often are they like monitored during it? How often are they like weighed a lot or?
They weigh in, the strength coaches weigh them in periodically, and then they keep track of their own weight, and I will talk to them about that too.
Okay. And so your role in the team, what exactly does the team's dietitian do?
So I wear a lot of different hats. I deal with what we call the food service side. So we have a fueling station in the weight room where they have different foods that they can grab for lunches and snacks and pre and post practice. And then there's a training table where they eat breakfast and dinner. And so talking to them about the choices that they have up there and what they should be choosing.
Do they have to eat those foods?
No, it's not mandatory, okay. But most of them do because it's good food and it's free. So right. that definitely helps them out a lot. And a lot of times they're asking me what types of snacks they should be getting at the grocery store, and I'm telling them, well, pretty much the same stuff that we have available for you in the fueling station, so you might as well just take it from there instead of going and spending your money at Walmart.
And so the fueling station is just kind of for energy while they're working out and stuff. It's not the main meal?
It's not the main meal. They do get lunch there. They can grab lunch or just snacks. Sometimes when they're on campus and they're walking from class to class, they have a little bit of time. They might stop by and grab something to eat. But the main meals are breakfast and dinner, and those are served in our training table. At
the training table? There's no I always thought there was a cafeteria where only athletes go.
It's basically a cafeteria.
Okay.
And it's all athletes on campus.
Right. Okay, gotcha. So what I want to do is I want to get a sense of the football program's philosophy towards nutrition, what the players should eat, how you get them to eat the right things like that. But I want to get there by starting off with some specific questions, okay. and then we'll get to the big picture. Well, for the first part, to what extent is your recommendation, and your main job is recommendations, right? Do you make the menu or do you approve it?
I review the menu from our chefs, and I work with them to try to decide what to eat, but also to move it around. So we don't necessarily want to serve them baked chicken, broccoli, and rice every single night. Right. So sometimes we like to do stuff that's a little bit heavier. Yeah. Maybe not the most. I don't want to say the most nutritious, but definitely not something that you want to eat the night before you're going to get up and run a bunch in the morning.
Sure.
So we move the menu around based off of what they have the next day and what's appropriate for that time.
Right, okay. To what extent will your nutrition guidance be individualized based on the person and their position, or to what extent is the advice so useful for everyone that it's kind of the same for everyone?
So we kind of think about it like a pyramid. So I first talked to all of them about how you should eat as a football player. So the football players are going to eat very differently than like a cross-country athlete or a baseball player. So that's pretty much across the board. Football is physical. Football requires, most of them are trying to put on as much muscle as they possibly can. Right. And so there's a specific way to eat for that. Then we'll move into how do you eat eat for your position group. So even within a football team, you have a lot of different body sizes, from your linemen to your skill players, and so I'll talk to them about that. Most of the time, the people that, if anyone's trying to lose weight, it's probably going to be a lineman, whereas most of the other players, there's not a whole lot of running backs or receivers that are going to be trying to lose weight. Those are the guys where we're trying to bump it up constantly, just because they tend to be smaller. And then we'll move into individualization. So depending on their specific goals and what works with their body, and also what food they like. So that's a lot of the individualization, is just talking to them. And when you're making recommendations, either from the training table, the fueling station, or what they should get at restaurants or from the store themselves, a lot of it goes into what they actually like to eat.
Okay, so most of the individualization is just trying to give them nutritious food they want to eat, kind of like the same problem that I think schools face. Do you have any vegans on the team or people with dietary restrictions?
Not currently. Every once in a while someone will have some dietary restrictions. That tends to happen more with a lot of the other teams. And a lot of the female sports, you find more people are vegetarian or vegan. But the football team does have somebody every once in a while.
Right. Well, before we get into the football players' diets, I guess we should say that you were a track star here. Tell us what years you were here and what events you competed in.
So I competed here in 2016 to 2017, and I did the 100, 200, and 4x4.
Okay. When you were here, did you like the foods?
It was good.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, and it also just helps me to be able to think about different ideas for the training table, because I ate there myself. So I remember what it was like to be the athlete that was eating there, and what types of foods I liked, what types of foods I didn't like, especially from a different perspective, somebody outside the football team, because our training table does serve all of our athletes, and sometimes the tastes of the girls cross country team are going to be different than the football team.
Right, I can see that, yeah. Okay, so let's get to nutrition. Okay, let's start off protein. First, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to dispel the notion that if you want to build muscle, you should consume only protein powder.
That is a very common misconception. So protein's very important. That's kind of what I start out with. I tell all of the players, anchor your meal with protein. So every time you sit down, whether it's a meal or whether it's a snack, look at your plate and see, do I have protein? And we recommend protein shakes, especially after a lift. They're easy. They're quick. They can take them, especially if their lift isn't necessarily around the time where they're going to go eat a meal right afterwards. So there's a group that lifts at 1:30. And so, that's not necessarily, they're not going to go eat dinner right after they're done, because they finish at 3 o'clock. And so protein shakes are good for that. And also, is
that a general rule, like every time you have a big workout, you should have some protein shake?
That's usually what we recommend.
It's not just pure protein.
No, so that's what I was going to say. Protein is very important, but so are carbohydrates post-practice. The carbs help fuel muscle protein synthesis, and so if you look at most of the protein shakes, they'll have about double the amount of carbs as they do protein, and that's a pretty standard ratio that you want, and most of those carbs are sugar. And so sometimes people are going, oh, I can't drink that protein shake because it's sugar.
Simple sugars?
Exactly, yes. And so while I would not recommend having a bunch of simple sugar for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right. Pre and post workout, simple sugar is actually what you want, because it's very easily absorbed into your system and it's quickly used. So there is a purpose for all types of carbs, even the simple carbohydrates. It just is the matter of what context are you having them.
Right. So exercising a lot, one reward is you actually get to eat sugar.
Yes.
So what type of proteins? Is there a particular type that combination you really want them to have?
Not necessarily. I think it's best to try to diversify your protein. So for breakfast, most of the time protein is going to be eggs. They do have, there's sausage, there's bacon, but calling those a protein might be a bit of a stretch. Yes, there is protein in it, but it's a lot of fat too. Not bad to have at breakfast necessarily, especially, they just worked out, they just, burnt a lot of calories. So have a piece of sausage, but I wouldn't count that as your protein for your meal. Right. So eggs are usually great for breakfast. Meat is awesome. It's not impossible, but it's hard to get enough protein in without eating meat, especially if you are a 325-pound lineman who needs, 250 grams of protein a day,
Yeah.
that'll be hard to get without incorporating meat. Not impossible. I don't discourage anyone from, being vegetarian or vegan, but I just talk to them about the reality of how that might be a little bit more difficult.
If you had a vegan, what protein sources would you recommend for them?
Vegan, they would probably have to rely a decent amount on things like protein powder.
Okay.
And then there's beans, whole grains like quinoa. There's lentils, chickpeas. There are ways, but it's hard. And especially when you take into account that they're very busy football players. So that matters too. A lot of times they'll look and see like professional athletes and they'll say, well, they're vegan. I'm like, well, they also have millions of dollars and the only thing that their only job they have is to play football. They're not going to school.
They don't have
they're not doing
tests
all
and
of the
stuff.
same things that you are.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible, but you're going to have to really pay attention to make sure that you're getting enough protein.
Okay, so you were mentioning the bacon and sausage. You mentioned fats. What about fats?
So fats are kind of use it to fill in the rest of the calories that you need. It's not as big of a focus in the sports nutrition world. We kind of focus on protein and carbs for the most part. Fat's important, but I usually tell most of the guys, unless you're actively trying to eat low fat, you probably are getting enough. Just because most of your food is cooked in fat. You'll have things like bacon and sausage and dairy and meat that has fat in it. And so it's not super often that you find someone that isn't getting enough fat unless they're trying not to, which I would not suggest anyone try not to. It's still very important for hormone function and also just making sure, a lot of the players, they focus on their body fat percentage and they want it to be as low as possible, which I understand that, but I'm also like, your fat, it protects all of your internal organs, and when you're getting tackled constantly, you need at least a little bit of that to make sure you're gonna be okay.
Right.
And so we have a threshold that we try not to go under, but there is always room to improve body composition and things like that.
Okay. So carbs, simple carbs, complex carbs. How do you design? I guess we already know when you want some simple carbs. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing in the main meals you try to avoid simple carbs and you won't complex carbs that are something that you see as really good.
Yeah, so I try to say, make at least most of your carbs at meals, try to make them complex, or at least things that aren't simple sugar. So potatoes aren't necessarily a complex carb. They're pretty starchy, but that's still a good thing to have with dinner. And so really I say, use your simple carbs at meals as kind of like a condiment. Like if you want to put some jelly on your whole wheat toast or you want to add a little bit of syrup on top of your whole wheat pancakes, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't necessarily completely avoid it, but that shouldn't be the main source of carbs at your meals.
And so if I'm saying complex carbs, what kind of, if you want more complex carbs in their foods, what kind of foods are you thinking of?
Oatmeal, brown rice, brown pasta, just any whole grain bread, whole grain, even things like whole grain waffles or pancakes or things like that. Just trying to focus on stuff that has a little bit more fiber in it, basically.
Yeah, so I was asking about, when you say like brown rice, white rice is so much better. Brown rice isn't near as good. But, and so like with brown rice, it's rice with the husk and everything in it.
Yes.
And the main things, are there carbs in that important, or are you mainly thinking of fiber and vitamins and minerals?
Mostly fiber and vitamins and minerals are what you find in the whole grain version instead of the refined version of different carbs.
I know parents have a hard time getting children to eat enough fiber. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem that y'all faced, always trying to get more fiber in there?
It's definitely a focus. It's definitely not on the top of the list. A lot of our guys are actually pretty good at eating, their vegetables and things like that. They'll eat salad. They'll eat the whole wheat pasta that we have at the training table and things like that. So it's not a huge issue unless someone was coming to me with a GI issue, and then I might specifically address it with them. But typically, I'm just recommending try to get some vegetables in, try to make some of your carbs whole grains. Not something we necessarily harp on a lot with the guys.
Yes. Are there any mineral supplements or vitamins y'all always want football players to be on, or does the food have enough that they don't need it?
So we try to get most of it from food. That's definitely the first choice. But having a multivitamin for the guys, and then specific supplements just kind of based on need. And the
How do you determine need?
So that would be mostly the medical, the sports medicine staff, because they'll do their physicals, blood work,
tests,
things like that. So then depending on what the needs would be, then I would take that information and then help the guys figure out, okay, what foods first off are high in these minerals or vitamins that you're kind of lacking, and then we'll address, okay, do we need to start supplementing?
Right. Okay. Suppose you had a wide receiver that wanted to gain weight, but this person is working out all the time and eating as much as he can. Is there anything else they can do?
So typically the two things that we do are eat more often. So, most of our guys are not just eating 3 meals a day. It's kind of 3 meals a day plus minimum something pre and post workout. And that's the minimum, but then you can add in snacks in between meals. Bedtime snacks are usually a really good way to help people gain weight, especially, and it can help
Give me
your
an example
sleep.
of a good bedtime snack.
So I always, again, focus on carbs and protein. So something like a protein shake isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially because it's easy, or like cheese and fruit, or nuts and fruit, or what would be another example? A lot of guys like eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches before bed. And so that's kind of what we focus on. Even chocolate milk. I say don't go drink a gallon of chocolate milk before you go to sleep, but if you want 1 cup of chocolate milk before you go to bed, that can be a really good bedtime snack.
Right. So the average football player is, can they, because they're working out so much, can they basically just eat as many calories as they want?
No.
No.
No. There is a limit. There is a threshold. A lot of them do have trouble gaining weight. But what I say is, a lot of people, they look at the guys that need to gain weight and they go, oh, you're so lucky. You can eat whatever you want. But in my opinion, and the way I try to explain it to them, gaining weight shouldn't necessarily be fun, because that's not an excuse to go and eat a bunch of stuff that you shouldn't be eating. You just need to eat more of what everybody else is eating, which a lot of times is actually not very pleasant when you feel like you're stuffing your face.
Right.
And if they get to that point where they're like, I'm eating so much and I'm starting to feel miserable about it, then we might make some swaps. So I might say, okay, what kind of milk are you drinking? You're drinking 2%? Well, let's make it whole milk.
Okay.
Or let's add some powdered milk to whatever you're eating. Or, adding peanut butter to just about anything is a pretty good way to bump up your calories. So it's not that it's a free-for-all necessarily, but sometimes there are guys who I'm like, okay, you might need to, you have a little bit more wiggle room than maybe somebody else does.
Yeah. What if you have someone who needs to lose weight, but they're working so hard, they're famished?
So that would just be pull back in really small ways. So meaningful weight loss, especially in an incredibly active population, needs to be slow. So I don't want people dropping a ton of weight really fast, because it's very difficult to drop a lot of weight really fast without losing muscle mass. And that's never what we want. I mean, I don't know if there's been anybody who it's like, ooh, you have too much muscle. I mean, it can happen. It can happen. People can feel too bulky, and so they might want to slim down a little bit, but that's not super common most of the time, especially in the people who need to lose weight. They need to lose fat, which
If they
takes
feel
time.
bulky, I'm guessing they're just they want to run faster. Is that
Yes.
what feel? Okay.
So basically with football, kind of the goal is to be as big and heavy as possible while still feeling like you can move well.
Okay.
So it's kind of almost like a bell curve,
Right.
as far as like there's an ideal, and you get too heavy and you can't move as well, but then you're too light and you can't perform as well because you can't tackle or withstand being tackled as well.
Right. Okay, so let me try to kind of summarize what I'm hearing, and then you tell me where I was right or where I was wrong. I would imagine a lot of our students would be interested in this because, I want to be a peak performer, even if they're just intramural.
Mm-hmm.
Intramural games can be very meaningful to people. And they're watching this and they're listening for little secrets that no one else knows. But there is no, so your main thing is there's general rules. You got to have enough protein in the right proportion, carbs in the right proportions. You got to have energy, and you get it through the basic old-fashioned foods and shakes, But even the shakes, they're not some factory concoction. They're regular food, and lots of variety. Always have lots of variety, and it sounds like that's the main thing.
Yes.
That's really about it.
Yes. So kind of my coined term is brilliance in the basics. So we try to just really lay that foundation, especially when they come in as freshmen,
Right.
Because if we can lay that foundation, then we do have room to individualize it. So it's both very generalized, but also incredibly person specific, but you have to start out with the general recommendations to then see where you need to tweak it for yourself.
Okay, good. Well, last question. I imagine there's a number of people watching this who's saying, dietitian for the nation's most powerful offensive team would just be a dream job. How do I get a job like that? Tell us just what kind of qualifications you need, that kind of thing.
And so in order to be a registered and licensed dietitian, which is what you would need to have this job, you do a certain amount of classes, and they can be undergrad or graduate classes depending on the program. It's called a DPD program, and so you get those classes. I did mine in undergrad, and then I went to grad school, and I got a master's in nutrition, but I also did a 1,200-hour internship. And so the three pieces that you need for grad school or for to be a dietitian are the DPD classes, this 1,200-hour internship, and then you take a national exam and pass the exam. And in 2024, starting then, you also have to have a master's. So I wouldn't have had to have a master's myself, but I went ahead and did it. And then all of us would just be grandfathered in. But after 2024, you do have to have a master's. And OSU has an absolutely fantastic nutrition program, both undergrad and graduate. The professors are incredible. I enjoyed my time here so much. They have an internship program here too. So if you want to learn more about that, they can come talk to me, or they can go to the Human Science Building and speak to the professors over there if they're interested.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Lauren.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.